It's about, I woke up at 3 and I'm having flashbacks, and I never got published, so I wanted to put out a little something on Tom Murphy, who died in 1994 at the hands of medical negligence and a drug named Percodan. He saved my life, and I loved him dearly. But he had a sad life. I believe he was gay, homosexual, and he wasn't sure. He was celibate. He'd been raised in Sudbury, Ontario, in a brutal, brutal society towards gays and lesbians, and women in general. And you can lump gay men in that category. And he was raised by a mother who didn't love him, but controlled him, and an alcoholic father. And it didn't take him long to become an alcoholic. And he went into the army, and there was a terrible, terrible episode in Germany. I don't know the year. I'm 78, and Tom would have been about the same age as me. But he was stationed in Germany. And a group of guys, because he was celibate, thought it would be fun to tie him down, take him hostage, and force him to have sex with a prostitute. And the episode so badly damaged him, he went completely insane and on a drunken rampage, and was discharged dishonorably wound up in jail in Germany, in a German jail. And anyway, the Canadian Army took him out and dishonorably discharged him, and he became a minor. We met in AA in 1985. He was now he'd been taking care of me and helping me go to meetings. Actually, I guess I met him in 84, sorry. But anyway, one day in a meeting, I took a paralysis attack, and Tom, as though he was looked like he was big and strong, 6 foot tall, his arms were not strong enough to carry dead body weight of somebody who was paralyzed. And that's where Dan McIsaac, who was his friend, also in AA, and they both worked at Detox. And Tom solicited the help of Dan. And I want to talk about Tom because maybe, although I'll never get published, a boy or a young man out there will find something in Tom's story, and they will be able to love themselves regardless of how society treats them. Tom loved music and loved dancing, and he was a really, really interesting, good dancer. He could really move with the rhythm of the music, not just the choreography. And he especially loved to love fat women, obese women, dance with young men. And this would have been our last happy night on the planet, not when he died, but about a year before he died. He would come and visit me in Collingwood, and we went dancing. And he rescued me from a doctor, and I put that story on my biography, but this is about Tom. And earlier that evening, he had just sat back and so happy and getting such pleasure out of these full-figured women dancing with handsome young bucks in the prime of their life. Now, I honestly don't know why that thrilled him so much, but maybe because you didn't have to look perfect to be attractive in another way and have fun. And we used to go out every Saturday night for a non-alcoholic drink, both of us clean and sober. And I think this would have been around 1986. And we had gone to a place called Chevy's in Sudbury. And it was a 50s style disco on Highway 17 near Falconbridge Road. And they played a lot of jitterbug jive and 50s rock and roll and some Latin. And it was a wonderful, wonderful disco. But he never got up and danced with any women himself. He was much too shy. He would only dance with me. And it would be years before I realized that it was the young men that he was really interested in. And I immediately understood. He was so filled with guilt and shame, and I didn't know his full story at this time. But I knew that he had been brutalized. And I was convinced he really would never enjoy being half the dancer, half as much as he did, just watching them swing and sway, and their healthy young bodies. He had already had a heart attack. He was far from healthy. And the expression of pleasure on his face, it just made me so happy and joyful to see him like that. Eventually, I would prod him into getting up with me because Sudbury is one of the world's largest and filthiest mining communities. And until the men saw you dancing, even if they were gay, because in Sudbury they stayed in the closet, no one would ask you out. And I wanted him to connect with people like himself. And I knew they were out there on the dance floor. And reluctantly, shyfully, so sweet, he finally would shimmy and shake to the erotic rhythmic dance. At that time it was called lambada. And it was more like a cross between African and Latin. Tom and I were very much bonded through some of the ugliest periods of prejudice we had both endured in society. We had started our sobriety with such hope. Little did we know we were both doomed from the get-go. I was a glutton for sick maniacs. They saw me coming and they came at me like flies to honey. And Tom took pity on me. I was always mystified how a sweet guy like Tom would have anything to do with the nasty little bastards of the streets. There were some young boys on the streets that were really just born evil, really nasty. But he really thought that if he was friend to them, he might save some child the emotional torture of being gay that he had endured. But it was a call in the middle of the night from some kid begging for help. Regardless of the cost to him, he would dash off to rescue. And these young half boy, half man, they would just take him for as much money as they could and he'd spend another small fortune on a con artist, on something or other. After a doctor tried to murder me and illegally incarcerated me at the Sudbury General Hospital, it was Tom who drove in a mad dash to my rescue. He was like that. And it was Tom who spent a small fortune to keep me alive. And it was Tom who helped me research in the beginning the cause of my crippling disorder, only to discover that chemical poisoning was so prevalent, brain damage so common, 20th century medicine refused to even recognize it as a disease. So we went through hell together. Dan bought me books, but it was Tom who was a really good reader, and he had something in his brain that he could really connect. And he'd had training in emergency training in the mines, and he often pulled me out of anaphylactic shock. And just when I thought I would become successful in uncovering the world's worst cover-up in medical history, Tom was sent home after a mine blast from his underground job, confused, near violent. In excruciating neck and back pain, he agreed to take his doctor's prescribed muscle relaxant without knowing that it had lethal side effects. It would never be the same between us again. I had not heard from him for years, and my letters had returned unopened. I later found out that that was fueled by his mother. She couldn't bear to see him happy, and she was jealous of our friendship. Other than a few weird messages cursing me on my answering machine, whose voice I suspected was his, we never saw each other at AA meetings. He stopped going. By May 1989, I left Sudbury, running for my life, and I flew to New York in '89 wearing a gas mask in a wild quest to reverse my crippling disease. It was not yet diagnosed as Parkinsonism, which I later found out in New York from a neurologist. I had been immune deficient and bleeding since a teenager, crippling since 6 years old, 1966, catatonic very often, month-long blackouts all through the 60s. In June, after returning to Sudbury from New York, since all health groups in Canada refused to help me, I had gathered 6 file drawers full of research, including some impressive reflections from Pollution Probe Toronto and Prevention Magazine in Florida. And I was then blacklisted by the national media in Canada. I had a lot of media prior to that, small town media. So I went on a local cable exposing the cover-ups on chemical diseases. And this TV blurb was followed by death threats, smoke bombs, and gunshots ran past my ears while cross-country skiing. So in 1990, with the help of the Premier of Ontario, David Peterson, although he never looked into my case as a lawyer, and he lost the election. Yes, he did that one thing. He got me out of Sudbury safely, but he never bothered to look at the history and the medical abuse and the laws and the corruption, which I think is a tragedy, a missed opportunity. After 4 years later, from New York, I now had research on over 50 diseases caused by chemicals, a direct result of systemic chemical poisoning. Tom called, invited me to dinner. No note nor warning, just a call with exciting news, he said. I should have known better. During our disgusting meal of stale fries and toxic meat burgers, he flew into a violent rage, calling me a slut and other numerous obscenities, and I never saw him again. And he left that restaurant, a raving lunatic. And it was then I realized that Percodan had turned him into a schizophrenic. And he died 3 years later, 1994. But what really destroyed Tom was not his being gay, his hidden sexuality. It was the medical crimes of the worst nature in history covered up by society, medical, and government. That was his real killer. He died a slow and painful death without pity from family, friends, co-workers, and the members of AA. I wrote this story and I sent it out to a number of gay magazines that I hoped would be published. But my writing just proved never to be good enough. I never got anything published. And chemical poisoning is still not considered to be a crime, and this is now 2020. And because of the brain damage that I suffered and the distortion of my memory, although ochre reversed the brain damage and controls the crippling paralysis, and an organic okra diet for disease control keeps me alive, and wearing a gas mask allows me to drive and walk safely in pollution, I know the benefits of my diet recipes would have helped Gulf War syndrome, chronic brain disorders like mine, Parkinsonism, or even inspire millions of lives in Tom's memory. Young men, young boys, brutally tortured and treated by society. I'm going to enclose a few of the pictures. And I'm putting it on YouTube. And maybe someday a young boy, a young man will find it. I love you, Tom. While you were on this planet, you didn't know any love but mine. But I know that the Creator has a special place in the universe for you. And I will be dying soon from COVID-19. And I don't know if we will meet in that other dimension. I hope so. But if not, I know that in whatever dimension you are, Tom, I will be heard, and you will know that you are loved and you are missed. And God bless all boys and all girls of what I call the third species. There's men, there's women, and there's gay. And they are God's children. And they belong as much on this planet as the rest of us. I love you, Tom. May you be dancing in the heavens in that other dimension with people like yourself and know what it is to be loved. I love you, Tom. Good night.